with some really fantastic speakers who are going to be talking about how we can engage the media in our ADAP advocacy, and a lot of the skills that we're going to be talking about and the practices are going to be applicable to all forms of type of media advocacy, not just focused on ADAP, but that is what the HIV Meds Access Campaign focus is, and so that's sort of the frame that we're going to be using. So we have Kimberly Smith, who's the Senior Director of State and Local Policy for Harlem United, who's going to get us started this morning, and then we'll take it from there to talk a little bit to go through and talking about, she's going to be talking about media advocacy and effective messaging, and then Sean Berry and Kyle Murphy, Sean from Vocal New York and Kyle Murphy from NMAC, are going to share with us a couple of successful media strategies that they have used, and then Regan Hoffman, who's the editor-in-chief of Pause Magazine, is going to talk about successful ways and tactics that we can use to really engage the media, and then Ian Anderson from Smart and Strong is going to be talking with us about effective ways to use new media, and talking about Facebook and Twitter and some of the new media outlets that are out there for us to use to really get our message out. And then following that, we'll open it up to questions. We are going to ask folks to hold questions until the end, and we do have a pretty packed agenda. We're on until 1 o'clock, and but we're excited to get started. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Kimberly. Kimberly, are you there?
Hello.
Hi.
I am here. Can
All
everyone
right.
hear me?
Yes.
Great. All right. Thank you, Jessica. So I'm really in charge. I'm just going to start with the basics. What is media advocacy? Well, according to the Marin Institute, which I just learned today actually is now called Alcohol Justice, it's a watchdog group for the alcohol industry, and the Berkeley Media Studies Group, respectively, media advocacy is community organizing combined with strategic engagement of the media to promote the adoption of public policies. Further, it is the strategic use of mass media to support community organizing to advance a social or public policy. So you'll hear more about this in the presentation, but media advocacy is not just exclusive to print media, but surely can extend to social media as well here, but also TV and radio. So many of us on the call today, media advocacy is a mechanism to increase awareness of HIV and AIDS, community health, and social justice issues in the public and in the press. So if you think of public policy as an intervention to correct the public problem, making resources equitable, for example, or advocating for social reform, media advocacy is a tool that we can use to advance this intervention. Next slide, please. Oops, next slide, please. Thank you. So one of the fundamental steps in thoughtful media advocacy is developing an effective message. And I think that taking the time at the front end of a media advocacy campaign or process goes a long way to ensuring that we can be successful. So there are a series of questions we can ask ourselves when embarking on media advocacy to help develop this message. Some of them are highlighted here. The first really is, what's the problem I'm seeking to highlight? Is there a solution, and what is it? Of course, this webinar is supporting advocacy for ADAP, but Jessica mentioned that these tools are applicable to all, most other advocacies. So the problem we want to highlight is that ADAP across the country is in crisis, and thousands of people are on waiting lists in states across the United States. So is there a solution, and what is it? Who can make the solution possible? And what do you need to do or say to get this attention? You can see that many of these questions are the same questions as you might ask in developing a more general advocacy strategy, presumably after you've uncovered the data, the research, whether it's qualitative or quantitative, that highlight the problem. And with media advocacy, you're answering these same questions, obviously with the media in mind. Next slide. So this is pretty basic, but once you've answered these questions and you have a general idea of the message you want to convey to the media, you move on to sort of tweaking this message. So the message should be simple and clear. Obviously, if the reporter or journalist doesn't know what you're talking about, chances are she or he won't report on it. The message should clearly point out the problem, as I mentioned before. And this is one that I think we often take for granted, but it's hard to do. I mean, the message should be persuasive, compelling, and newsworthy. Newsworthy these days is difficult with so much competing media. But I think media advocacy, we can also often make something newsworthy by making an issue local and clearly describing the local impact that the issue is having. So the ADAP crisis is a national crisis, but perhaps the story is about the impact or benefit of ADAP in your own state, city, or town. Or you could profile a person who's on waiting lists or highlight somebody who's benefited from ADAP. Or perhaps if you want to go this angle, you can highlight controversy between legislators who may be for or against ADAP. So we know that controversy makes news. This is the reality of today, and advocates can use this tactic or not. Drama, opinion polls, injustice, special events, scientific breakthroughs also help to make an develop an effective message. And as people living with and impacted by HIV, the success of our advocacy in general is very much tied to giving voice to our own stories and helping others to do the same. And so it goes with media advocacy. It's critical to humanize the message, letting people know that, for instance, that 8,230 people on the ADAP waiting list are, they represent actual individual people, each with a story to tell. And finally, we want to make sure that the message fits the audience. Next slide. So here's a sample message. More than 8,000 HIV-positive individuals who need financial assistance getting life-saving medications are on a wait list for those medications. Certainly, we could spend hours probably brainstorming on how to tweak this to make this even stronger, but this is, it's just a sample. It's relatively clear. It points out the problem. It's compelling. We could probably add drama or controversy to this message, but I do think it implies a certain injustice. And it starts to humanize, it does humanize the issue a bit, though we could certainly go further to expand the message in that direction. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the next step, say we're satisfied with our message, the next thing to do is to think a little bit about the framing of the message. So what's the frame, you ask? Well, the frame determines what information is included in the story and what is not. It helps shape how the audience views who is responsible for the problem and its solution. And to just provide an oversimplified example, I think that perhaps the frame in the general ADAP story is how cost-effective ADAP is versus just simply how much it costs. Since ADAPs are funded through state and federal contributions, this is an important differentiation. The frame might also make clear that waiting lists are only part of the story with the ADAP crisis. And when you drill down a bit, you see that there are other compelling problems and issues that people in need of these medications are facing, i.e. not being able to enroll in ADAP, or income requirements that are restrictive, or having to share the burden of the cost. And of course, the large frame is all about access and folks not having it. So how you communicate the frame is important. Elevating powerful people, places, and images can help create this frame and help it to stick in people's minds. And as much as we all, I think as advocates, like to talk and write maybe, messages these days do need to be short, succinct, and compelling sound bites. Next slide, please. So here are, what follows are some talking points for this particular campaign, for the HIV Meds Access campaign, that can serve as a frame for the story with your media, local or otherwise. And you can see that each of these can be backed up with data or human interest angles, et cetera. And so they're just simply what they say up on the screen, that ADAP waiting lists for medications will cause people with HIV in the U.S. to become needlessly sick and die, that waiting lists will worsen existing racial and economic health disparities. ADAP promotes jobs and employment by keeping people with HIV healthy enough to work. And investing, as I was talking about the cost issue, investing in ADAP makes good economic sense. Helping HIV-positive people stay healthy is the moral and right thing to do. Next slide. And here's another one when we talked about scientific breakthroughs being news. And the results from a recent clinical trial, the 052 trial, showed a 96% reduction in HIV transmission by HIV-positive people who initiated ARV therapy early. So these results provide dramatic evidence that access to HIV treatment can play a significant role in reducing HIV infections nationwide, and with the big frame being that HIV treatment keeps people and communities healthier. Next slide. We went backwards. So I'd like to now invite Sean Berry, who's the director of Vocal New York, to talk a bit about Vocal's experiences engaging the media. Sean is a colleague and a friend, and Vocal is doing great work here in New York. And they've earned a lot of respect and credibility among activists and advocates across the state and the country. Formerly the New York City AIDS Housing Network, Vocal is a statewide grassroots membership organization building power among low-income people who are living with and affected by HIV/AIDS drug use and incarceration. So as I said, they've done some outstanding work and have had a lot of success engaging the media. So Sean's going to tell you a little bit more about that.
Hi, Sean, are you there?
Yeah. Can you
Oh, great.
Hey, good. So first off, thanks for having me on the call. Everybody on is my hero for the work you're doing to advocate for ADAP. And I'm going to just make several points about what we've learned in media advocacy. But first and foremost, if Vocal can do this, anybody can do this. We have no dedicated communication staff or budget, and we have a very scrappy organizational culture. Most of our staff can't even figure out how to work the coffee machine. But we do well when it comes to media because we sort of follow the steps and tips I know Regan and Ian are going to talk about later in the call. And we make sure that we frame stories so that they're newsworthy for reporters. So first point I want to make is that just to remind everybody, the reporters are human, and like us, they view their job as serving the public good. So it's very important to treat them like humans, very busy humans, but to pick up the phone, call them, have a conversation, trying to learn about what their interests are. I also want to mention that the goal for media coverage, at least when it comes to advocacy, elaborating on what Kimberly said, for us is to establish credibility for a campaign, so it's seen as something that elected officials or other decision makers should be interested in, and then most importantly, to pressure decision makers. So we always try to be very solution-oriented in our media. Even when we're profiling an individual story, we try to link it back to a policy or a budget issue that will improve their lives and other people's lives. It's important to think about media in different ways or expecting there's a lot of different formats depending on your goal or the story. So when it comes to print or newspapers, there are opinion pieces like editorials and columns and guest op-eds, pieces that folks like us can write and submit, and Larry's the editor. And then there's the straight reporting news articles. And then there's TV and radio as well that tend to focus more on the reporting, less on the opinion, but also have different formats. And along with that, it's important to keep in mind who we're targeting, whether it's a political reporter, which is who we primarily work with in New York, or if it's a health reporter, or if it's just a general assignment reporter, or if you're trying to get an editorial, focusing on the editorial board. And then thinking through, am I going to target the editor or an individual reporter, which is something I think Regan's going to get into later. But it's important to know the landscape of what kind of coverage you want and how those reporters operate. And I want to go a little more in depth into what I think was a third bullet point that Kimberly went over in effective message development. Just because we think something is newsworthy does not mean it is to anybody else, and especially reporters who are just bombarded with press releases and lots of interesting news. So to highlight some of what Kimberly mentioned, ways to make something newsworthy are, one, to connect it to a scientific breakthrough like the HTPN 052 trial results, or release of a CDC MMWR report on HIV prevalence, or most importantly, data on ADAP waiting lists, which is reported on periodically. And whether or not you have an ADAP waiting list in your state, you can use it as a hook to say, look, here's some new data about an issue that is an interesting angle locally. The next thing I want to talk about is localizing national stories. So if you have a waiting list in your state, that's a clear angle to talk about. But even if you don't, talking about things like restrictions that are being considered or have been introduced for ADAP eligibility, or even just concerns about budget crunch, or just expressing solidarity with states. Like in New York, we have a pretty secure ADAP program, but we still want to make sure our elected officials are doing everything they can to eliminate waiting lists in other states. So one way to do that is to have people living with HIV rely on ADAP for medication. If you're in a state with a waiting list, I think it's important to have someone who is or has been on a waiting list, but even someone who's currently relying on ADAP for their treatment can, what reporters will call a sort of human interest angle. We just have to make sure we don't just stop there and that we connect it to, here's a solution to this problem. It's not inevitable. Dates like anniversaries and holidays, World AIDS Day, today's World Hepatitis Day, those are also news hooks to push a news story or to organize an event. Another thing about making something more interesting for reporters is, if Sean Berry, random activist, says something, that's not necessarily interesting. But if an elected official says something about the ADAP crisis, reporters are going to pay more attention. So taking steps like having a resolution considered at a county government or city hall or even the state legislature, or having a press event or a town hall forum on the ADAP crisis where elected officials are invited to come and speak, that can help get the attention of people in the media. And then lastly, I want to mention that creative actions are a great way to get press coverage, and it's something that Vocal does a lot. And we usually use them to target an individual decision maker. So say we go to a member of Congress who is on the fence about supporting increased funding for ADAP to address the waiting list. Maybe we can do something like go to their office and hold a prayer vigil with faith leaders, or we do something angrier and confrontational where we deliver empty pill bottles, or a mock casket, or we have a die-in and do chalk outlines to sort of symbolize the crisis around the ADAP waiting list. And just to keep in mind, if you do an event, make sure you put out a media advisory ahead of time. You can contact the local Associated Press to have it on the day book. And then you can issue a press release at the event or right afterwards to help tell the story from your perspective. And then just one last thing about making events newsworthy. It's also a good idea to consider issuing your own report on ADAP. And ways to do that can include working with a local university researcher, working with this campaign nationally. And you can do it pretty easily by just even repackaging data that's already out there and adding some local angle, and that also becomes a news hook because it's something new is happening. There's this new report that you're asking the media to report on. And then I'll end by just putting in a plug for social media, which Ian is going to talk about later. But really in the past couple years, and it's accelerating every day, Twitter in particular is a great medium to reach an elite audience of reporters and elected officials who track that stuff to keep in touch with people in the community, what their colleagues are thinking about, instant reaction from politicians. And it's a great way to develop direct relationships with reporters. And it's also a good way to develop a list of local reporters that you can follow through Twitter. You can create this list of Twitter handles that you follow. So we follow different categories of reporters to just track what they're thinking about, which helps us better pitch stories. That's it from me.
Great. Thank you so much, Sean. So now we're going to hear from Kyle Murphy from NMAC, who's going to talk a little bit about the project that they're doing around ADAP and sort of telling the story beyond the numbers. Kyle?
Hi, thanks, Jessica. Thanks so much, Jessica and Jim and the AIDS Foundation of Chicago for putting this together. There's been some real great material here so far, and I'm really excited to be part of this and put that out there. For those of you who are not familiar with NMAC, we're the National Minority AIDS Council. We represent a coalition of about 3,000 faith-based and community-based organizations and AIDS service organizations advocating and delivering HIV/AIDS services in communities of color nationwide. So kind of like everybody in the HIV community, last year or the year before, NMAC started becoming increasingly concerned with the ADAP crisis. and started looking for a way that we could make a difference and help advocate around the issue. One of the biggest sort of sticking points and issues that we saw was the general lack of awareness, both about the issue and the crisis. So, a lot of reporters had never even heard of the AIDS Drug Assistance Program. A lot of people, surprisingly, who were even on the AIDS Drug Assistance Program are not familiar with the actual name of the program where they receive their medications. So we really thought that it was important to do kind of a major media push around it, both the issue to raise awareness of what ADAP is, how important its services are, but then also the crisis itself, and sort of the lack of funding, the various wait lists that exist in different states, and then the cost containment measures themselves. NMAC is sort of from a media position, we're a national organization, so we don't do direct services for people living with HIV or AIDS, and our work in states is limited sort of by our positioning here in Washington, D.C. So a lot of the policy work that we do is focused on the national perspective and legislation in Congress, which of course is an area where the ADAP crisis could be addressed through increased funding and appropriation through Congress. But a lot of the crisis is also focused in state legislatures. So Florida legislature, for example, their contribution to their state ADAP is particularly low, which is part of the reason why their wait list is so long. So for us to drive media attention in states, it's kind of a challenge because, as we said before, media likes to have kind of a localized angle to their stories. So, if we were trying to pitch stories to the Washington Post, the New York Times, we would be placed pretty nicely to do that. But to try to get a story in the Salt Lake Tribune or the St. Petersburg Times, it's a bit more difficult for us. So we had to try to get creative. So what we decided to do was start a video advocacy campaign that would generate our own media via the videos that we created and the website that we've dedicated to host them. And then that would hopefully sort of alleviate some of the need for traditional media. We purchased a number of video cameras, just easy flip cameras, nothing too expensive, and we sent them around to community partners in various states, some with wait lists, some without wait lists, because as I said, the point was also to just educate people about the AIDS Drug Assistance Program itself and not just the crisis. And they interviewed as many clients as they could in their state to try to put a human face on the statistics. So we've got a lot of numbers out there. We have there's 8,000 people on the wait list, there's 3,000 people in Florida, there's the various cost containment measures in 17 states, but there's human stories, individual stories behind each of those numbers. So we really wanted to collect those and house those and store those in one place. So to date, we've collected about 40 videos from about 10 different states and have pasted them on our website, which is adapaction.org. There's a little thumbnail of that on our slide there. And some of them are, really touching, really emotional. Some of them are pretty factually based. It depends. Everybody has a different comfort level to their videos. But I think that kind of as a conglomerate, they provide a really good snapshot of what the program itself is and what this crisis means to people, the hundreds of thousands of people who rely on this program. And our hope is that the videos will sort of spread through the internet themselves, sort of go viral. But also we're using social media, our websites, our email lists, and press releases and trying to generate press coverage of the website's launch to spread those around. But we're also hoping that this method of collecting these individual stories will also help spark interest from local reporters. So, if we were to just call, like I said, somebody at the Orlando Sentinel and say, there's this ADAP crisis in Florida, and we wanted to try to bring it to your attention. You guys should definitely cover this issue. 10 more people were added to your wait list in July. It would be difficult for a national organization like NMAC or anybody who is not based in Orlando to necessarily get those reporters to pay attention. But if I have this website and I have videos from people living in Orlando who are actually experiencing this crisis firsthand, that's going to be much more compelling to those reporters. So our hope is kind of twofold, that we can be our own media and we can avoid having to rely on traditional media to get the issue out there, and we can educate the public ourselves, but also that this campaign will spark media interest and kind of go viral in that way. We've only had the site up for a few weeks, but so far we've gotten some fantastic feedback. We've gotten some internet stories in the Florida Independent and some various other websites, online media. But our goal is to try to get this out there as much as possible. We hope that this will increase media attention for the ADAP crisis, and yeah, I guess that's it.
Great. Thank you so much, Kyle.
Kind of a quick snapshot. Thank you.
Fantastic. So now we're going to hand it over to Regan Hoffman, who's editor-in-chief of Pause Magazine.
Also, thanks to you guys. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. I just want to thank Jessica and Jim and AFC also for inviting me on the call today, and all of you for being on the call. It's obviously, today's a perfect day for us to have this call, given what's happening down in Washington and the dire situation that we're facing with all the budgetary stuff. As the editor-in-chief of Pause and Pause.com, which you guys know is a magazine for people living with and affected by HIV, I sit on both sides of the fence. I get pitched all the time, and I also pitch in turn the national media and provide information to them and work as a resource to try to get lots of broader media vehicles to pick up the stories that we know are happening out there, that I hear from the community, and that also we write ourselves. So how do you get heard? There's three basic components, I think, to think about. One is that you really want to build media relationships, and you want to build them before you need them. Second, you want to be able to pitch like a pro, and I'll talk a little bit about how we can do that. And then three, you also want to brief and teach the media. And Kimberly referenced this. We really want to be the media's friend and acknowledge, without letting them sort of know that we're acknowledging it, that they might not have as much information as they could, and help them become experts. So the first thing you want to do in terms of building media relationships, which really actually seems almost obvious, but it's not, is really nurturing individual relationships with both local, regional, and national media. Even though you live in a small town, if you do, you absolutely can be a resource for the national media. And often national editors are really looking for experts right in the field, on the ground, and they are the stories that they're going to pick up and make big. So never think that if you're in a smaller state or in a smaller area that you can't be a resource to CNN or anybody else. Attending local events will help you with your networking, but there are also ways that you can attend more regional or more national networking events as well. And wherever you are at any event, there will always be press there. So be sure to introduce yourself to the members of the press, give them a card, let them know that you'll be a resource. I think also being an avid consumer of media and knowing what outlets and platforms are reaching the very people that you want to target is really critical. As an editor, I tend to get pigeonholed into my own work, and I really make an effort to read broadly what's out there, to be aware of all the new and different media vehicles as they pop up, whether they're websites or print stuff, and to really get to know the editors and the staff. They often change, so you have to keep on top of that. Next slide. One way to build relationships is to follow up once you've met someone. Send them interesting information about your topic, even when you're not pitching a story, whether that's an announcement out of the White House or HHS or some related story. Just constantly send them information so they don't forget you. Offer to serve specifically as a resource when they're doing related stories. So, for example, sometimes people will call me about an HIV story or a sexual health story. I know a lot about sexual health in general, so I can help them with that as well. Be a source for them to find statistics that are accurate and timely, help them meet people and get to the personal stories that will help make the most compelling stories, as many of you guys have already said, and direct them to the experts that you know. We all know a lot of experts in this field, and again, they're familiar to us, but they might not be to the press. So I'm often saying, hey, I'll connect you to someone, whether it's Tony Fauci or someone in a local hospital that can help them and make those introductions. It sounds silly, perhaps, but complimenting them on the work that they're doing on other topics is a great way to engender yourself to them and make friends with them. And my best journalist friends are people that I admire their work, and so when they write a great story, I will send them a little quick email and say, hey, great job on that. Next slide. To pitch like a pro, you want to anticipate the right moment to break a story. That's always hard. There's some that are set in stone, like the Awareness Days and World AIDS Days, things like that. But you really want to be prepared, because when the stuff hits, you want to be first out of the gate with all the resources that that person needs. And know the audiences of the outlets that you're pitching. So, for example, I know Oprah's going to call me, the week before World AIDS Day, and I know what kinds of stories they do on Oprah. So I'm going to have a bunch of people lined up who are willing and ready to go on Oprah, and I'm not going to pick people who wouldn't be appropriate for her show or who her producers don't want. Conversely, I know when Sanjay Gupta and CNN call 3 weeks before testing day, I know kind of what they're looking for and who their audience is. So I try to find people to connect them to that might be more appropriate for their audiences. So I always just pretend that it's the day that I'm making the pitch, and I actually write it up. I have the facts and the stats and the human interest angle and the media-trained subjects who are ready to go, and I work to have that sort of in the can, so to speak. Media-trained subjects, I just want to mention that. A lot of you guys know real people living with HIV, and this is always such a weird thing to say, real people. I don't know why I just said that, but that's what the media says to me. We need real people with HIV as opposed to fake people. But what we need to do is also make sure that the people that we're connecting the media to are themselves prepared to get the statistics correct and deliver the messaging and the framing and the sound bites that we want to have out there. And if the email has hyperlinks to information and attachments that are fact sheets, which you can use all the fact sheets on pause and lots of other resources, that's great. And also just make sure it's accurate, because I sometimes do get pitches where things are not accurate. Sean's a really good example. At crisis breaks, Sean calls me. We already have a relationship. I trust him. I've worked with him before, and I know his facts are going to be right, so I don't have to fact check him, which is great. So he's a very valuable resource to me as an editor. This part has always been mentioned, so I won't go over it again. But individual stories are very compelling. NMAC does it beautifully with their ADAP work. And honestly, we all get such a sea of email that if you can be provocative or make something jump out, even if it seems silly, you'll get through easier. And I swear, this point has been mentioned as well, we are all human. So if I see a subject line, and this is a real one, unruly beavers controlled, I'm going to actually open up that email. I mean, how can I not, right? So if you have a relationship with the reporter, attach your name to that so that they know who it's coming from. Make it short. Don't bury the lead. Put the most important pieces up front. If I'm going to read the first sentence, that should be all I really need to know to get me hooked. Follow up with a phone call and another. And really, I know this also sounds, this is something that people, they'll call me and they'll apologize for calling me so much. And I have always said, no, thank you, because I'm so swamped. And often I'll have in my mind to call somebody back, but I just get distracted or have something else that, there's a bigger fire taking place. And if that person calls me again and again and again, I'm going to know it's important. And if I get 10 phone calls from someone, I'm not going to ignore them. And if they're trying to reach me through Facebook as well and Twitter as well, I'm not going to ignore them. So really, it's not personal if editors don't respond to your producers, and really just set your expectations that you might have to reach out 10 or even 15 times. Briefing and teaching the media, this point has already been made by Kimberly as well, but I think I would just add to her points that it's helpful to put a context around this disease, the larger framework, the scientific and economic and political and social context. Why is AIDS important? Yes, we want to keep people alive. We want to save money. But it also stabilizes the global economy. It's also good foreign policy. It's also for our national security important. Those are obviously points to be made about the global fight, but they're not relevant to what we're doing here. One of the things I'd like to do is invite small groups of editors in, and this sounds obvious, but don't invite someone from People and Us magazine. They compete with each other, so they're not going to be as comfortable together in the room. But I'll invite editors from unrelated types of magazines together to have a casual lunch and give them updates, brief them on what's happening with AIDS. And that way they have that in their heads, and so when they are asked to write a story or news breaks, they'll feel more comfortable, they'll be more willing to do it, and they're more knowledgeable. Giving them an overview of the epidemic and a fact sheet is really important. I can help anybody who needs like a one sheet. I've got our cheat sheet here that we use. The numbers change all the time. New statistics come out, new data comes out, and we have one sheet that I actually carry around with me all the time and constantly update that we give to reporters. And again, I think access to the people, taking them into the field, going with them into a hospital, going with them into a hospice, going with them in someone's home, making that introduction and greasing the skids for them and making them comfortable. People often don't feel comfortable talking to someone with HIV. When I'm interviewed by reporters as a woman living with HIV, they often don't know what to ask me and they feel weird, and they often say, I don't know if I should ask you this, or I can ask you this, or I feel funny asking you this. So sometimes just brokering those conversations and asking the questions that people are happy to answer will help. And let them know when they're doing something wrong. I mean, when the New York Post wrote did the terrible coverage of the AMF guy, and it just was off the mark. We wrote a big blog. I called them. I emailed them personally, and I tried to say, look, you can do this better. So finally, I think as an editor, if you can deliver a complete story to me and give me something that's fresh and timely, that's terrific. You're doing my work for me, and I'm going to be grateful to you for that. If you can bring me new faces and very compelling faces that are really going to resonate with my audience, that's terrific. If you give me some expert freelancers or people who just know the subject inside out, a local Department of Health person who's an expert in policy or what the financial implications are going to be of a decision, that's really helpful. And again, this has been mentioned, but experts and ideally experts that can come from the outside, reiterate what you're saying, and also bring some attention to this, whether they're a local politician or an official figure or someone of importance. One thing I want to say about ADAP, we've been talking about the ADAP crisis for a while. We've been saying it's 8,500 people. The news out of Florida is really something that would grab the media's attention, because we've been talking about the crisis for a while, but we've got something new. And we also want to put something into a larger context. I mean, if you really think about it, this is the tip of the iceberg. And if you look at the statistics, we really have about 90,000 people who arguably need care immediately. That's a lot of people. And we have 850,000 people who are not virally suppressed in the United States of America. That is not a way to stop an epidemic. And that is something that would really grab people's attention too, because it's new, it's fresh, it's a big number. And then finally, because I think I'm running out of time, the persistence extends to also the number of people that you're contacting in any organization. Don't just pitch the editor-in-chief, pitch their number 2 and their number 3. If you give people an exclusive, make sure that you respect that and don't give it to somebody else. That's happened to me before. If someone calls me up and says, hey, I've got a really great story and I want you to break it, I'll forever love them. That's great. When the story comes out, if it comes out, really promote the heck out of it and let the media vehicle that ran your story know that you are promoting it. And Ian's going to talk a little bit about how to do that through social media, but also blast it on your website, put it out through e-newsletters. Try to get people to comment on the story on their homepage or on the page of the media where the story sits if it's online. And then thank them. Continue your relationship with them by taking them to events and engage them in an ongoing way with the community, whether it's dinner with a bunch of friends who are HIV positive or just making them really emotionally engaged and connected to the issues and pluck their heartstrings. And I'm happy to help anyone, anytime. Call me, pause as a resource for you. Our help shouldn't stop here. So thank you so much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Regan. So we are going to turn things over now to Ian Anderson, who is with Smart and Strong and who's going to lead us through a conversation talking about effective ways to use social media. Ian?
Thanks, Jessica, and thanks, Jim, for putting this all together for us today. Smart and Strong, just real quick, is the parent of PAUSE, in case you couldn't tell from the slides looking the same as Regan's. We're in the same company. Smart and Strong also has AIDSmeds.com. And then we also have some general health sites for African Americans, Real Health, for Latinos, To Salud, and then we also have hepatitis and mental health. So why don't we just jump through right into this and go into the introduction, the next slide. So, what is social media? The definition keeps evolving. To me, this quote, the third bullet there, I saw this on the AIDS.gov site, and I think this really sums it up the best. consumers want their media when they want it, how they want it, in whatever quantities they want it. So the motto we have here at Smart and Strong is we're going to deliver the information to you where you need it, when you need it, and however format you need it. So that's what's behind everything, and that's really the great definition of social media. It's everything. It's your iPhone, it's your iPad, it's texting, it's BlackBerry messaging, it's everything. To give you some perspective of the social network that we're going to talk about, Facebook is now over 600 million users worldwide. Twitter is now over 200 million users worldwide. Tumblr, which is an up-and-coming platform that you're probably going to start to hear more and more about, has passed 20 million bloggers at this point. And then if you look, there's social media sharing tools that you can use from Add This and Share This. And if you look at the list of sites that they allow you to share your content on, it's now over 340 different options. Good luck keeping track of them all, but basically if somebody's using it out there somewhere, you can share our content on it. Next slide, please. So getting started, what I'm really going to focus on today is number one is Facebook. It's the biggest. You just heard it, 600 million users. And then the number two, if you have time, and it sounds after Sean's comment about the elected officials and the reporters being a little heavier on Twitter, that's probably an important 1-2 punch for you to do. If you have time and you can get into the other social sites, I'd recommend Tumblr if you're looking to go younger, LinkedIn for professional, Flickr for photos, and then the old standard YouTube for videos. So if you're looking to create a Facebook page, they've evolved over the years what kind of page you can do. It used to be groups. It used to be you had to do it as an individual. They now do a pretty good job of allowing you to create a company page. So it's your page. It's Paz Magazine. It's owned by Paz Magazine. They allow you to move around in Facebook as Paz Magazine. So I would recommend that. A couple little tips. You can create a custom URL for your page once you've hit 25 fans. Careful because you can't change it, but after you reach 25, you can do something like Paz Magazine, so you have a quick link to your site. And the other thing to keep in mind is once you've reached 100 fans, your Facebook page name is locked in, so something to keep in mind. Twitter, much simpler. There's a character limit of 15. Otherwise, do whatever you want. Change it whenever you want. Obviously, you want to try to settle on something at some point so that you can stick with it, but maybe your first choice isn't available today. You watch 6 months from now, it becomes available, switch. Your followers will follow you there, and all of your messages will follow you there. And then lastly, you can create a Paz blog. We invite everybody in the community to create a blog on Paz. It would go into Regan and Oriel and the rest of our team here. You can see AIDS United is on there. Phil Wilson from the Black AIDS Institute is on there. Paul Kawada from NMAC is on there. This isn't meant to replace what you're doing. It's meant to supplement it, to increase your visibility. So give us a call, and we're happy to work with you there. Next slide, please. All right, so some really top-line basics. You have to use it. You can create a Twitter, you can create a Facebook page, but if it just sits there, no one will find it. So number two, promote it. You have a website, you have newsletters, you're out talking to people, you're going to events. Make sure you talk about your Facebook, your Twitter, whatever else you have. And the last basic tip is use URL shorteners. The URLs of your website are going to be very long, generally. You can use something like Bitly, Owly is good to make it much shorter. And in a 140 character limit on Twitter, saving 20 characters on your URL is huge. You can fit a lot more into your message. Next slide, please. So building an audience. All right, you've created a Facebook page, now what? Key is now that you can move around as the page you've created. So I can go on as Paz Magazine. I can look around and I can follow the sites that I like. I can post news on their walls as Paz Magazine. What I recommend is you look around and find the big boys. The biggest out there, I think, right now in HIV is the Red Ribbon Army. They allow you to post on their wall. They're very good about reposting your stuff. The only drawback, really, with Red Ribbon Army is they're a little more international focused, so it may not be as helpful if you're really trying to target in your local town or state. But you have Pause Magazine, you have The Body. I mean, there's just a long list of sites on Facebook. So look around and work with those that you are most interested in. Twitter, very similar. You want to follow those of importance in the community. If you're looking to find more people to follow, well, go to Pause Magazine and see who follows Pause Magazine. That'll give you some more insight into who's big in the HIV community. You can follow up to 2,000 accounts at a time. One thing you can do if you're trying to build up, follow 2,000, which lets you get yourself in front of those 2,000 people, and then unfollow them a month later and follow 1,000 more. So you just keep getting your name out there, keep connecting to people, keep getting on their radar. Another sort of obvious trick if you're using Twitter is to retweet content from sites you admire. So if you like Pause Magazine, you like a story that we posted, retweet it to your audience. By doing that, you get on our radar. We see that you've done it. And then going forward, when you tweet stuff, we're much more likely to retweet your stuff. It's a web etiquette that if you see somebody helping promote your stuff, you promote them back. And then both Facebook and Twitter, you got to use it. You have to get on there regularly. You have to be posting. Facebook, the current recommendations are 1 to 4 times a day. Twitter, believe it or not, I just read a report, 1 to 4 posts an hour. Now, we can't do that many, and I'm not sure who is out there doing that many, but the point is use it, post several times a day. We try to hit 5 to 10 a day, but do what you can manage, but use it. Next slide, please. All right, so some more tips for getting out the word. So you need to cross-promote what you're doing. So if you're on Facebook and Twitter, mention Twitter on Facebook. If you're on Twitter and Facebook, vice versa. Get on Twitter and tell them you have your Facebook site. And do it over and over and over again. Don't do it once and think you're done. Do it once a week, once every 2 weeks, but regularly. There's a bunch of sites out there that you can use to help get the word out about your site. WeFollow is one of those. It's a Twitter aggregator. You can go in there and list your site by keyword. So HIV, you can get on there and under HIV, rank yourself. So your site will start appearing. Anybody looking for HIV will see your site. There's also a list on WeFollow for most influential. So here you can find others in the HIV world who's most influential, who's out there doing a lot of work in HIV. You can use that to follow them. Another tool that's sort of up and coming is called Clout. They basically rank you. They say, okay, how good are you at this whole social media stuff? They look at your Twitter. They look at your Facebook. They'll look at your LinkedIn. Again, you can look on there, do some searching around HIV, and see who's got clout. The number one, it's a scale of 0 to 100. I think the number one these days is Lady Gaga. Obviously, she's got the most fans. And she's at, I think, 92. So get on there, look, Pause Magazine's in the 50s, which is a pretty good number for HIV. Follow those people. And then the last tool that I like to use is twitterfall.com. Here you can type in a keyword, and then you can monitor what's happening with that keyword 24/7. So you can look at HIV, and you can see everybody on Twitter up to the second and what they're doing with HIV. Next slide, please. All right, so you've done the social network thing. You've got it up there. Now what? How do you figure out, is it a success? The first step, what do you want to accomplish? Are you trying to drive traffic somewhere? Are you trying to get people to attend a protest at town hall? What is it? Once you figure out what you're trying to do, track it. What we do here is I look at fans and followers, and there's all kinds of tools provided by Facebook and Twitter and others. I actually like to do it in a spreadsheet that I manage. Once a month, I just look at all our Facebook pages, all our Twitter pages. Okay, how many fans do I have? And where is it going? Is it going up? Is it going down? For real time, I think Sean talked about this earlier, but if you really want to move people quickly, Twitter is number one, hands down. We can post something from our forums threads, and in minutes, hundreds of people will be in the forums. Facebook overall drives more people for us. They just do it over a longer period of time. So 24 hours, you can get 2,500, 3,000 people. So it depends what you're trying to do. Twitter is real fast. Facebook is probably bigger. Next slide, please. All right, I think we're running a little long, so I'm going to go through this real quick, but the slides will be available so you can take a look at it later. One thing that you might not be aware of is when you add a link to a wall, you can customize the title, description, and image. So don't just post it and be like, oh, I don't like the wording. Change it. Make it your own. Another tip is if you want to get an image out on Facebook, make sure when you post your blog on Pause or anywhere else and you want an image in it, post the image to it before it goes live. If you put up a blog and then a day later add an image, Facebook may not see that image for days. They have a real caching problem with their system still. So just to keep in mind, images are really important. Test how many work for you. I said, 1 to 4 on Facebook. Does 1 work? Does 2 work? Does 3 work? You have to do it and see how many. There's a stat that shows you how many people are looking at it. See how it feels. And make sure you keep sharing your content. Go on their wall. Take their stuff and put it up on your wall. It has to be the interaction. Next slide. So for Twitter, make sure you have an image up there, a description. Make sure, and somebody mentioned this earlier, make sure you know the handles, the Twitter handles of the people you care about so that you can mention them. Or, for instance, maybe you have an important message you'd like them to retweet. So if you put on there, hey, we have a big meeting today at noon, please mention this to your followers, and you put at the end, Pause Magazine, we'll see it, and we'll be more likely to retweet it for you. Know your keywords. Kimberly was talking earlier about going local. So maybe in addition to HIV and AIDS, you want to list the state you're in. Okay, so it's California. So you put California as a handle so that as a keyword so that people watching California will also pick up on this. I mentioned URL shorteners earlier. Keep in mind that they do go out of business on occasion, so you might want to mix up the ones you're using. So you can use bit.ly some of the time, you can use isgood some of the time. Just mix them up so that if one of them does go out of business, all your old tweets don't become irrelevant. When you're trying to tweet, mix it up. Don't just do it at 9 a.m. every morning. Do some at 9, do some at noon. You can use tools to tweet at off hours. We tweet all weekend long. We do it through scheduling. There's not a lot of human interaction going on there. We just set it up and let it go. Last slide. So next steps, 1, get your Pause blog up. That will help expand whatever you're doing and get it in front of our audience and our social networks. Next up, create a post. Put up your first blog entry, Twitter handle, put our Twitter handle in it. So when you tweet it, we can see it and we'll retweet it and help you. And then also look for and find the 25 most influential HIV sites on both Twitter and Facebook. Find them, like them, and follow them. And that's it.
Great. Thank you so much, Ian. That was fantastic. So we've got just a couple of minutes left, literally, and have time for probably one question. And we've had one queued up since the very beginning, which I think is really a perfect one to end on as well. And I think I've unmuted all of the presenters, so you have the opportunity to reply to this. But basically, the question is from Ramon Gardenhire, and he asks, can you give some powerful examples of ways to frame ADAP in a way that raises its profile with lawmakers, policymakers, and the media, or and the public in the climate of this fiscal crisis, with so many issues and causes being zeroed out or underfunded in state budgets?
Can I answer that one? This is Regan.
Please do.
Because we just had a Capitol Hill briefing yesterday, an AMFAR sponsored briefing. We had 6 hours up on the Hill, and the thing that I heard from the staff and the members who were there was it's really hard to just go ask for more money in a time when everyone's cutting budgets. And the argument that if we pay now, we'll save money down the road doesn't matter to politicians because they're just trying to get reelected. So what does seem to resonate with people is that we have an opportunity, an unprecedented opportunity to end AIDS right now in America. And by giving people access to care, we can stop the spread of the disease, and we can keep people alive. And we're headed in the wrong direction. And we have the tools to stop this epidemic right now, and there is some moral obligation to do so, but really, I think making them heroes and saying, listen, this is a depressing, difficult time with a lot of really difficult choices. No one has the answers for any of it, and a lot of people are going to be unhappy, but at the end of the day, we're at a tipping point in AIDS, and we can end it. And smart, strategic investments right now will not only save lives and lots of money down the road, but will put an end to one of the most horrible things on the planet. And I mean literally combining the financial arguments with the human and the ability to change history. I hate to say this is really maybe a weird thing to say, but there are a lot of people who want to make their mark in the world, and that's why they're up on Capitol Hill. This can be a legacy of this Congress. We can stop AIDS. We can show the world that we know how to do it here. We've been a leader in global funding for AIDS, but we cannot let our own domestic epidemic implode. And this is one of those, it's a battle that's winnable according to Frieden. We have the scientific evidence that's extremely compelling. Push 052, push all of the examples that we have from science, highlight the step out of Rome, highlight the coverage that PAWS and AIDS Meds have done, and tell them that this is a way that they can become a hero in a very depressing time. That's my 2 cents.
That's a perfect response, Regan. Thank you so much. Ian or Kimberly, did you wish to weigh in on that as well?
I think she pretty much said it.
Yeah. Me too.
Yeah, well said, Regan. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we don't have any more time for questions today. We're right up at the line of where we need to end for the afternoon. But I want to thank everyone for joining us today. We had participation from individuals and organizations across the country. So we're very excited that you took advantage of this opportunity to learn some new skills from fantastic presenters. And I want to thank each of the presenters for taking the time to join us today and to share their expertise in these different areas. I want to encourage folks to check out a few extra resources. There's the doseofchange.org where the HIV Meds Access Campaign materials are housed. There's talking points, there's sign-on letters, there's fact sheets. There's a lot of great resources there that can assist you in your advocacy efforts. Additionally, check out PAWS.com, NASDAD.org, and of course, NMAC's ADAPaction.org for more information. Finally, just to remind folks, so the HIV Meds Access Campaign is a regionally coordinated effort led by each of the organizations that's listed up here, and here's sort of the breakdown of the regions and the organizations and leaders that are responsible for those different regions. All of these folks are willing and able to help you with your efforts and can help connect you to other organizing efforts within your region around ADAP and HIV Meds Access and can provide some great coaching and training opportunities. So I encourage you all to reach out them directly. And if you have any other questions, please feel free to contact them or us at AIDS Foundation of Chicago. And we thank you all for joining today.
Thanks so much.
Thanks. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.